Today we're getting into, well, just an incredible story.
It really is. A life that, honestly, almost defies belief when you read about it.
Exactly. We're talking about Louis Zamperini, and we're drawing from excerpts of Laura Hillenbrand's book, Unbroken.
Right. Our plan is basically to walk through them, pulling out the key moments, the really surprising details, and what these pages tell us about his journey.
Think of it as getting right to the heart of his story, but strictly through the lens of this text. From his early days to the Olympics, the war.
Yeah, all based on what's written here in these excerpts.
Okay, so let's start where the book does, pretty much. Not with the hero, but with young Louis in Torrance, California. The text calls him a one-boy insurgency. What does that look like in these pages?
Oh, it looks like chaos.
Oh.
The book recounts him robbing the local bakery, constantly. Yeah, and digging this, secret cave hideout for his stolen goods. And just constantly running from people. The phrase the book uses again and again is, "and then I ran like mad."
Huh. Okay. But the text argues this wasn't just being a bad kid, right? It actually shaped him.
Exactly. It says this chaos made him clever, resourceful, and bold, almost incapable of discouragement. It's like all that dodging trouble was unintentional survival training, you know?
And how did his brother Pete fit into this? The book draws quite a contrast.
Totally. Pete's described as the golden boy, handsome, popular, sensible.
Oh.
Louis apparently ignored everyone except Pete. And Pete saw something in Louis's wildness.
And tried to channel it.
Right, pushed him towards track.
Yeah.
But before that, the book mentions a rough patch in adolescence. Louis becoming kind of aloof, germophobic even, and short-tempered.
Yeah, and learning to fight from his father. There's that specific detail about feeling a lightness after his first fight. It suggests a lot going on under the surface.
Definitely. And this part of the text ends with him, lying in bed, listening to trains, wanting to just disappear. Kind of foreshadows the journey ahead, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so how does this kid who runs from bakeries end up in the Olympics? The text points to a specific moment, right? With a key.
Yeah, it's a great anecdote in the book. He heard any key has a 1 in 50 shot of fitting any lock. Tries his house key on the high school gym.
And it worked.
It worked, according to the text. So he starts sneaking into games, gets caught, and Pete suggests track as the solution.
And he took to it immediately.
Like a fish to water. The book details his incredibly fast rise, making the 1936 Olympic team for the 5K, even with a toe injury mentioned in the text. He still ran one of the fastest times in the U.S. qualifiers.
Wow. And his Berlin experience, as described in these pages, sounds pretty wild.
Oh, absolutely. The text gives us these vivid snapshots, arriving, rooming with legendary Jesse Owens, swiping his do not disturb sign.
Classic Louis, seems like.
Yeah, totally. And the book mentions the Japanese team being like Santa Claus with all the gifts they gave out, but also the darker side, the Nazi banners everywhere, the military presence, the gliders. The text paints a very specific, unsettling picture of the atmosphere.
And the race itself, the 5,000 meters.
The book says he was fading, totally exhausted, but then he remembered Pete's words. A lifetime of glory is worth a moment of pain.
Powerful line.
Isn't it? And apparently he just found another gear, this dramatic acceleration, a dazzling speed in his final lap that, according to the text, stunned everyone.
And after the race, the flag incident, the text covers that too.
Oh, yeah. He's a crack. The guard yells, "Halt and see, stop." Louis, cool as you like, gives his name super Italian style. Rolling the R says he just wanted a souvenir of beautiful Germany.
Is that the flag?
The text says he did. Unbelievable audacity.
Yeah.
Consistent with that kid running like mad.
So that spirit definitely carried through. Okay, back in the U.S., at USC, the text describes him as a track juggernaut.
Yeah, breaking records left and right. And there's this mention of Jimmy Sasaki, this quiet Japanese emigre who the book describes as sort of lingering around, being friendly but kind of anodyne. Remember that name?
Okay, Jimmy Sasaki. Got it. And his famous mile race.
Right, the one where he thought he'd run slow, like over 4.20, but actually clocked 4.8.3. Fastest NCAA mile ever at that point, held the record for 15 years, according to the text. He was on fire.
But then the 1940 Olympics were canceled. First Tokyo, then Finland.
Yeah, a huge blow. The text notes he was peaking at exactly the right time for another Olympic shot.
So what happened then? The text says he felt unmoored.
Pretty much. Got sick, lost some races, even left USC before graduating. Ended up working as a welder at Lockheed, just mourning those lost Olympics while, the world was sliding toward war.
And his entry into the military wasn't exactly heroic either, according to these pages.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Washed out of Air Corps, training air sickness, worked as a movie extra for a bit, got drafted. And the text mentions him trying to fail the physical by eating a load of candy bars right before.
Huh. You can't make this stuff up. So this is where he meets his pilot, Phil.
Russell Allen Phillips, yeah.
Yeah.
Phil. The book describes him as kind of quiet, but with this hidden adventurous streak, like sneaking into the Indy 500.
And their plane, the B-24. Not exactly a luxury ride.
No way.
Yeah.
Nicknamed the Flying Brick or Flying Coffin. The text describes it as flat-faced, cramped, really dangerous, especially this narrow catwalk over the bomb bay, just 9 inches wide.
Yikes. And the training sounds intense, too. The text mentions buzzing an Iowa field so low they scraped the plane.
And skinned a crewmate's legs, yeah. Crazy stuff. But they bonded, too. Drinking, swimming. The text even mentions Phil having this bad dream about his girlfriend Cece leaving him. Little details like that make it so real.
It does. And then combat, the Wake Island raid in Chapter 10. What does the text highlight there?
The sheer terror, really. The bombing run itself, dodging Japanese Zero fighters, even a scary friendly fire incident mentioned in the text. It hammers home the danger. And the book really stresses the terrible odds if you did go down.
Right, the improbability of rescue, search planes crashing.
Exactly. And the descriptions the book provides of what happened to guys on rafts. It's grim. Starvation, thirst, exposure, men going mad, seeing things, hearing music. Awful.
Which sets a terrifying stage for Chapter 11 and the Noru raid, the story of their plane Superman.
Yeah, the text describes it taking an unbelievable beating, gravely wounded, Zeros hitting it relentlessly, holes everywhere, seeing the sea and sky through gashes.
And injuries to the crew. The text is specific.
Horrifically specific. Brooks dangling from the catwalk, Pillsbury in the turret, his leg shredded, boot gone. Just brutal details recorded in the book.
How did they even land it?
Barely. The book describes them cranking the bomb bay doors open by hand to create drag, struggling to get the landing gear down because Pillsbury and Douglas were wounded. Incredible airmanship described there.
But not everyone made it back safely.
No. Harry Brooks died a week before his 23rd birthday, the text notes. Pillsbury was badly wounded, taken to this cramped, dark building. He described feeling claustrophobic, surrounded by other injured men.
And Louis saw the plane afterwards.
Yeah, the book says he went up to Superman, put his hand through a cannon hole, touched the torn metal. He thought of it as a dear friend for getting them home. A powerful image.
Wow. So that crew was broken up. Louis and Phil ended up back in Hawaii.
Right, chapter 12. A short break. Living in a cottage, Louis actually ran a 4.12 mile on the beach. The text says he was in the best shape of his life.
And then the Green Hornet.
Yeah. Just a routine search mission. The text describes the crash starkly. Phil just saying, prepare to crash. Louis grabbing an extra raft. Men grabbing Mae Wests. Mitchell, the nose gunner, didn't make it out. Phil barely escaped the sinking cockpit.
And then the Raft, chapters 12 and 13. What does the text focus on here?
The immediate shock. Mac, another crewmate, just breaks down, convinced they'll die. Louis actually has to hit him, the text says, just to snap him out of it.
Setting rules for survival.
Instantly. Tiny bits of chocolate, sips of water, stretching supplies from day one.
And the failed rescue attempt, seeing their own squadron's plane.
Heartbreaking. The book describes them firing flares, using the signal mirror, seeing the Daisy May turn back towards them. Then clouds roll in and the plane just fades away. Devastating.
While back home, the families knew nothing yet.
Not yet. The text cuts to them receiving the men's last letters, the military policy being to wait. We read about Louis's mom, Sylvia, getting the news eventually, sobbing, but still telling her mother Louis would be fine, maybe teaching someone hula on an island. And Pete absolutely convinced Louis would survive if he hit land.
Such different reactions. Back on the raft, what were the days like, according to the text?
Grim. Eating raw fish, fending off sharks constantly. There's this weird bit the text mentions about an albatross landing on the raft. Phil feeling uneasy, thinking of the rhyme of the ancient mariner. A bad omen.
But the conversations between Louis and Phil were crucial.
Hugely important, the book stresses. It kept them sane, focused on the future, creating something to live for. But interestingly, the text notes they specifically avoided talking about the crash itself. Phil was clearly still traumatized.
Then another plane appears.
Yeah, hope flares again.
Yeah.
Flares, mirror, waving. They're weeping with joy as it turns back. Until it gets close enough.
Japanese.
Right. With the red circle on the wings.
And it attacks them.
Viciously. The text describes Louis jumping overboard, dodging bullets and sharks, while Phil and Mac are too weak to leave the raft. It strafes them 4 times. Miraculously, Louis isn't bitten, and Phil and Mac aren't hit, though bullets tear up the raft all around them.
Unbelievable luck. And the depth chart.
Yeah, the final insult. It lands nearby but doesn't go off. A dud, maybe, or the bombardier messed up. And the text gives us Phil's thought. If the Japanese are this inept, America will win this war. A moment of dark humor, I guess.
I guess I've been terrified, but the text says they started calculating drift.
Trying to stay grounded. They figured maybe 46 days to reach land. Double Eddie Rickenbacker's survival record. A terrifying number, but it gave them a target. Some kind of hope.
And Louis tried to catch a shark with his bare hands.
The text describes it. He grabs its tail, gets flung out of the raft, somehow scrambles back in. It's almost comical if it weren't so desperate.
But then Mac, he didn't make it.
No, he died. Louis describes wrapping his body, lifting him, feeling like he weighed almost nothing, maybe 40 pounds, and sliding him into the water. And the sharks, oddly, left him alone, according to the text.
How long were they out there in total?
The next night, the book states, marked their 34th day. Likely a record for raft survival at that time.
They survived storms, too, even a typhoon.
Yeah, the text describes massive waves crashing over them, having to tie themselves together, wedge their feet under the cushion just to stay on board.
And then finally, land.
The smell of it first. Soil, rain, greenness. Then hearing waves on a reef, they just collapsed, asleep.
Chapter 14 picks up there. Capture. What was the initial treatment like, according to the text?
Surprisingly, initially, a local alerts the Japanese. They're taken to a village, given food. A doctor examines them, calls them healthy, even though the text says they'd lost about half their body weight.
But that didn't last.
No. They were transferred, separated. Louis ends up at Ofuna, this secret interrogation camp, locked in a dark cell, totally alone. The silence from other cells was ominous.
And life at Ofuna. Chapter 23 paints a horrific picture.
Brutal doesn't cover it. The text describes the routine. Woken by yelling guards with clubs, endless roll calls bowing to the emperor, constant searches, beatings for tiny infractions, no talking, no singing, nothing, just fear.
And the guards themselves, the text has strong words.
Calls them dregs of the Japanese military, incompetent, deranged, driven by murderous sadism. Even guards who showed a shred of kindness were punished by the others.
Food was used as a weapon, too.
Absolutely. Starvation, rations, thin broth, rancid rice, full of maggots, rat droppings, sand. All Dumbo, the POWs called it. It wrecked their health, their teeth. The text has this awful detail of Louis, sick with dysentery, begging for a doctor who just laughs at him.
Were there any allies inside?
A few key figures mentioned in the text. Interpreters like Marr and Fitzgerald, and William Harris, this incredibly resilient Marine officer Louis met, already showing the physical toll.
And Jimmy Sasaki shows up again, the guy from USC.
Yeah, bizarrely. The text describes him visiting Ofuna often, looking dapper, wanting to reminisce about USC trap meets. He knew Louis had lied about his military role before the war, but never pushed it. Louis was just confused by him.
Any moments of defiance described in the text?
Small ones. The book tells this story of Louis being forced into a race against another prisoner. He won, heard the other captives cheer for a second, and felt it was worth it. Even knowing the savage beating that came next, he was clubbed unconscious.
Just awful. By mid-1944, Chapter 26 says things got even worse.
Yeah, constant beatings, rations cut further. Men like Bill Harris were just wasting away. Louis, Harris, and another guy named Tinker even started plotting an escape, according to the text.
Getting news was critical, but dangerous, because of the kill-all order.
Extremely dangerous. They knew if Japan started losing badly, the POWs might all be executed. The text tells this incredibly tense story about stealing a newspaper from the commander, the mummy.
How did they manage that?
Louis used a broom to snag it while the mummy dozed, timed it perfectly with another guard's, the quack's, cigarette break. Harris memorized the map showing Allied advances, then they got the paperback just in time. Nail-biting stuff, as described.
But the quack found out.
And went ballistic. The text describes his face turning crimson. He forced them into push-ups, the painful Ofuna crouch, then singled out Harris for a horrific beating that went on for maybe an hour, knocking him unconscious repeatedly, just savage.
And then the most notorious figure appears in the text, the bird.
Mutahiro Watanabe. Chapter 23 introduces him. Described as purely sadistic, fixated on officers, and especially on Louis. He hunted Louis down, called him his #1 prisoner.
What kind of things did he do?
The text lists brutal, unpredictable beatings, forcing officers to do degrading jobs like cleaning latrines. He called it the Royal Order of the Benjo, and delighting in burning the men's letters from home right in front of them.
Was he just insane, or was it calculated?
The book suggests maybe both. A desire for absolute power over men who, in civilian life, had higher status. He seemed drawn to Defiance, which Louis certainly showed.
So Louis gets transferred to another camp, Amori, chapter 24.
Yeah, shivering, weak. But the text mentions a small moment of kindness, a Scottish POW sharing precious sugar from a sock, a tiny gesture meaning so much. But critically, the Amori officials apparently didn't register Louis properly.
Which meant the U.S. thought he was dead.
Exactly. But the bird was at Amori, and the text says he zeroed in on Louis immediately. Lou described looking for him constantly like a lion loose in the jungle.
Life under the bird at Amori sounds terrifying.
Relentless. First thought every morning was avoiding him. No crowds to hide in during the day. The text describes the bird forcing officers to do useless work, like stitching pouches, which they deliberately sabotage. And the Royal Order of the Banjo continued, with the men trying to stay cheerful during the degrading task, just to spite him.
Then, chapter 25 describes Louis actually leaving the camp briefly, a trip into Tokyo.
Yeah, after 13 months, first time unblindfolded outside the camps, the text gives his impressions. A city bled dry, shortages, civilians looking ragged, everyone digging trenches, preparing for invasion.
And that's when they saw the B-29s.
Yes, a huge moment in the text. These giant bombers flying overhead with impunity. The POWs saw them as their messiah. They were cheering, yelling, "Drop the bombs! Welcome back!" The guards were apparently too stunned to stop them initially.
How did the bird react to seeing American bombers over Tokyo?
Like being shot in the head, the text says. He crumpled in pain, then bizarrely offered Louis toilet paper with fake sympathy. Just twist it.
And he kept up the cruelty, burning letters again.
Yes, the book recounts him forcing the interpreter, Mar, to burn a whole batch of letters the men had just been allowed to write. Pure sadism.
But then Louis gets involved with Radio Tokyo, chapters 25 and 28.
Right. Producers approached him. They showed him the actual transcript announcing his death back home. He agreed to record a short message.
What did he say?
Kept it careful. Said he was treated as well as can be expected, had no kick coming, asked for family photos. The text mentions he even brought up Watanabe's name to one of the producers, maybe hoping it would offer some protection. Unclear if it did.
And these broadcasts were actually heard in the U.S. Chapter 28 details that.
Amazingly, yes. A woman at the FCC, Lynn Moody, heard the first one, realized who it was. Huge news, because the Zamperinis had already received the Purple Heart, the life insurance payout. Sylvie was described as gaunt from grief and nightmares.
So hearing his voice must have been
unbelievable. Moody heard the second broadcast, too, confirming it was Louis on a show called Postman Calls. His voice, live from Japan, reaching home. Incredible.
Did Phil's family hear news, too?
Yes. The text mentions they got a War Department telegram confirming Phil was alive in a different camp. His fiancée Cece heard, quit her job, and went straight to his parents in Indiana. That fortune teller she saw was right.
Meanwhile, the B-29 raids intensified over Amori.
Daily, the text says. Sometimes just one plane, sometimes vast continents of them. The sirens became background noise. Incendiary bombs started fires nearby. Civilians were actually camping just outside the Amori walls.
Christmas brought a small reprieve, Red Cross packages.
A huge deal. The text lists some contents: real food, chocolate, cigarettes. Men gorged themselves, traded items. There's even a story in the text about a kleptomaniac prisoner stealing packages, getting tied to a tree. But a guard named Kano showed mercy, covering him with a blanket. Rare moments of humanity.
Then another transfer, Naoetsu camp, chapter 29.
Yeah, things got worse again. Men arrived from other camps, like Fitzgerald, warning the Amori guys they'd been lucky the bird had left Amori. But then Bill Harris arrived, looking like a wreck. And who shows up at Naoetsu?
The bird.
The bird immediately singles out Louis, beating him just for drill. The stress was immense. Conditions were terrible, freezing cold, slave labor in steel mills, coal barges, 18-hour shifts described in the text, men collapsing from exhaustion.
The text describes being forced onto a coal ship.
Yeah, terrifying scene. Rough seas, using this dangerous moving net between boats, guards screaming, shoving them. Louis barely making the jump, then forced into the hold to shovel coal. Just relentless misery.
Did the bird stay?
His presence became more sporadic, according to the text. He was made a disciplinary officer at another camp nearby, apparently carrying out beatings there. Some POW doctors even managed to deliberately infect him with dysentery for a while.
But the fear of the kill-all order was growing.
Massively. Invasion looked certain. The text describes chilling preparations. Machine guns brought into camps, accelerant, dog tags taken away, prisoners forced to dig tunnels meant to be their own graves. A civilian even gave a specific date, August 22nd.
The end seemed near, one way or another. Chapters 30 and 31 mention Hiroshima.
Briefly, the text notes the Enola Gay, the bomb, the shockwave felt by the plane. A POW at another camp described seeing the fantastically huge, roiling cloud. At Naoetsu, they knew something enormous had happened. Guards were stunned. Rumors flew about a new type of bomb, an electronic bomb, one paper called it.
And Louis' health, right at this point.
Terrible. Chapter 31 says he was gravely ill. Bloody dysentery constantly, lost more weight, severe beriberi, his fingers sank into his own leg. Even a minor guard hit him. And the bird returned just then.
What about Phil? Where was he?
In a remote camp, Rokuroshi, also near death, shivering on a liquid diet. The text mentions the phone ringing, his camp commander leaving abruptly.
And then, liberation. How does the text describe that moment?
Pure chaos and joy. Chapter 31. A plane flies over Naoetsu, blinking a code light. A radio man shouts, "Oh, the war is over!" The text describes a naked stampede of POWs from the river where they were bathing, just out of their minds with relief and rapture. Cheering, sobbing, climbing onto roofs, breaking fences, the Japanese guards just shrank back.
What happened right after at Naoetsu?
Guards suddenly became obsequious, bowing, but no food appeared. Fitzgerald had to basically threaten the commander to get supplies released. POWs raided the surrounding area, came back with a cow, pigs, taking charge.
Chapter 36 jumps ahead a bit, mentioning Bill Harris again.
Yeah, a powerful image from the text. Harris, rescued from Amori, standing right there with General MacArthur on the USS Missouri during the official surrender signing. A place of honor.
The text also uses this point to emphasize the sheer scale of the brutality, right? The statistics.
Yeah, really stark numbers presented in the book. Over 132,000 Allied POWs held by Japan. Nearly 36,000 died. That's more than 1 in 4. For Americans, it was even worse. 37% died. Compare that to 1% under the Nazis and Italians. The text mentions death marches, slavery like the Burma-Siam Railway, torture experiments, even cannibalism, widespread starvation and disease, places like Kwajalein where men were murdered secretly. Just horrific context provided.
And Louis' own immediate reaction to freedom in Okinawa.
Very telling. The text describes him looking at his old USC ring, which somehow survived the plane crash in captivity, and he just says, "It's finished. We'll never run again."
Back home, his family was still waiting anxiously.
On edge. Chapter 36 describes how the only official word they had was that dubious Radio Tokyo broadcast. Newspapers were full of atrocity stories. Sylvia kept writing letters to King Toots, terrified. Pete kept calling the War Department.
And Phil's official news.
It came. He was trucked out of his mountain camp, welcomed in Yokohama with pancakes and a band, then shipped home. His dad got the official word, and someone relayed a message from Alan himself. He was free.
Louis' homecoming is described in Chapter 37. Meeting Pete.
Yeah, poignant moment in the text. They met in San Francisco, both shocked by how the other looked. Louis was actually kind of portly from the recovery food, while Pete was thin and balding from the stress. They just fell together laughing. Then meeting his mother in Torrance, her cry of "Cura mamma mia!" The text also briefly notes the tragedies others faced, wives remarried, guys dying in accidents on the way home.
The book then really delves into the long-term effects on these POWs, physically and mentally. Chapter 37.
It's devastating. Physically, the text reports an average weight loss of 61 pounds, rampant disease TB, malaria, dysentery, lingering malnutrition, beriberi in 77%, neurological damage in 84%, ruined teeth, blindness, disfigurement. Years later, a third were still 100% disabled. Some just couldn't be saved.
And the psychological scars.
Just as bad, maybe worse. Tormented and sometimes ruined lives, the text says. Constant flashbacks where they couldn't tell reality from memory. Nightmares, screaming, lashing out in their sleep. Couldn't sleep on soft beds. Ducking when planes flew over. Hoarding food, the text mentions one guy, Halloran, stockpiling food. Owning 8 pillows, 6 clocks. Hallucinations, memory loss, using Japanese military terms unconsciously. High rates of alcoholism, over a quarter diagnosed. Halloran's story is detailed. Anxious, wary, hoarding. 2 of his crewmates literally drank themselves to death. A very dark picture painted in these pages.
And Louis wasn't immune. Chapters 37 and 38 describe his struggles.
Not at all. Heavy drinking. Flashbacks triggered by sounds like a car backfiring. He'd instinctively shout the Japanese command, "Kiwe!" Attention. Felt humiliated by it. His wife, Cynthia, begged him to get help. The text says he went to a VA counselor a couple of times but quit. Felt too turbulent.
And this is when the obsession with the bird started. Killing him.
Yeah, chapter 38. You read a story about another POW confronting his captor, and something snapped. The text describes this intense fantasy taking hold finding Watanabe, overpowering him, killing him slowly, savoring it. An electric urgency.
What about Watanabe himself? The text follows him, too.
It does. Describes him going into hiding, using a fake name, working on a farm. He couldn't sleep, apparently felt guilty for captured Japanese soldiers. But the text quotes him writing he felt no remorse for the POWs, calling himself powerful and strict. Hillenbrand points out in the text the irony: he didn't see the parallel between the farmer's kindness to him and his own cruelty.
He almost got married while in hiding.
Yeah, the farmer suggested it. The text says he met a young woman, liked her, thought marriage might save him from his loneliness and demons, but ultimately said no. He eventually reunited with his family, telling them he'd been questioned, but not where he'd really been.
And Louis's own marriage was falling apart.
Badly. They'd married super fast, less than 2 weeks after meeting. Post-war, his drinking, the nightmares, the fighting, it took a toll. The text describes a terrible incident where he shook their baby daughter, Sissy, during a bender. He was horrified at himself. Cynthia left, decided on divorce.
They were barely coexisting when he first heard about Billy Graham.
Right, living in Hollywood. Neighbors mentioned Graham's big tent revival nearby. The text says Louis just turned abruptly and walked away, not interested.
But Cynthia pushed him.
Yes. Chapter 38 ends with them arguing one Sunday, Louis refusing to go. Finally, he agrees, but only if they can leave the second. Graham asks people to bow their heads.
And the text describes Graham's sermon that night.
Just the start of it. Graham talking about a world of war and suffering, asking why God seems silent when good people suffer. And right there, the detailed account in these excerpts pauses.
But chapter 39 clearly shows a massive change happened after that night in the tent.
Absolutely. The text jumps ahead. It describes Louis's new life as a Christian speaker, sharing his story. Modest living, used car, small house, doing diapers for his kids, Sissy and Luke. But the book says he and Cynthia were poor but blissful.
And his perspective on his captors changed.
Dramatically. The text recounts him going back to Japan in 1950, visiting Sugamo prison where many guards were held. He felt this tingling sensation seeing the place.
And Watanabe, the bird.
The text includes parts of a letter Louis wrote to Watanabe years later. He says, love replaced the hate, that he'd forgiven his enemies after committing his life to Christ. He mentions asking about Watanabe at Sugamo in '52, being told he'd probably committed suicide. Louis wrote he was sad to hear that and forgave him at that moment, hoping Watanabe would find faith.
What about Pete, his later life?
Successful, happy family, long coaching career, beloved guy. But the text adds this touching, sad detail. Pete seemed more troubled by Louis's war experiences than Louis himself was later on. Pete developed this intense fear of the sea, always packing excessive safety gear. Shows how trauma ripples outwards.
And the very end of this section mentions a memorial in Naoetsu.
Yeah, a really powerful closing point in the text. The residents of Jotsu, where the brutal Naoetsu camp was, learned about the suffering that happened there. They formed a group, raised funds, and built a peace park and memorial. Partly inspired, the text notes, by a local Japanese veteran who himself had been treated kindly as a POW by Americans and was horrified by Naoetsu. Japanese people commemorating the Allied suffering in their town.
Wow, what an arc the text lays out. From that defiant kid, the Olympian, through unimaginable horrors, the struggle back home, and then finding this path to forgiveness.
It really is extraordinary. And the power comes from those specific details. The text provides the raft, the cants, the bird, the psychological aftermath, the small acts of kindness and cruelty, but makes it visceral.
It absolutely does. It really makes you grapple with the limits of human endurance and maybe the potential for change, even after experiencing the absolute worst.
Exactly. So, thinking about everything recounted in these pages we've discussed, what does Louis Zamperini's journey, as captured right here in this text, suggest to you about that capacity for resilience, or maybe for transformation?